In May 2015, the concrete and construction industry will be changed forever. Make a date with innovation. Make a date for African construction and Totally Concrete Expos.
So PwC's recently done two pieces of work to understand the state of infrastructure spend globally and within Africa. The first piece was done with Oxford Economics, and the second piece was our own research across Africa, talking to over 95 players within the infrastructure sector, both owners, developers, contractors, funders, regulators. And from that, we've concluded that the infrastructure spend globally will move from $4 trillion to $9 trillion to 2025. And bringing that to an Africa perspective, part of the emerging markets, that spend is expected to go from $70 to $180 billion also to 2025. Obviously growing faster than the global market. We represent about 5% of the global market in sub-Saharan Africa. And then if you look at how that spend is configured by country and by sector, the two dominant countries, as one would expect, South Africa and Nigeria. The expectations at the time of the study was that Nigeria would overtake South Africa in terms of spend. There are some dependencies around that in terms of economic growth. Obviously we've seen the impact of the oil price and various other external variables, and one will have to watch that to see what the long-term impact is. And then I think if we look at sectors, clearly the two sectors that make up 70% of that spend are transport and logistics, as well as. So from the survey that we conducted across Africa, the three or four most dominant themes were really around access to funding. When we unpack that, to our mind, it's not so much the availability of funding, but the packaging of projects, the viability of projects, that really limits the ability to raise that funding. Certainly there's enough capital around, but it's really finding the right projects with the right economic sustainability and feasibility. Second issue was around political risk, political interference, rent seeking as some call it. Really a challenge, I think, for private capital to come into countries and to put down fixed infrastructure. It's very hard to roll up a railway line or a road once it's been built. And one places a high dependence on the political will, the stability, and the fact that there will be good governance around large capital programs. We've seen some concessions being cancelled in some countries, and obviously that does create certain levels of nervousness among investors. I think the third thing is around capacity and skills. Really a severe shortage of skills from engineering, quantity surveying, architectures, and financial and legal expertise. And continuing with the challenges, I think a critically important one which was raised by almost all the respondents was the issue around the regulatory environment. And that would relate to property, access rights, traversing rights, environmental issues around tariff, regulating tariffs and costs. And really, I think without getting a regulatory framework developed which is acceptable to all parties and creates the right enabling environment, I think that's certainly raised as one of the most key challenges. So I think we might have questions around why all the hype around infrastructure, why is there this growth and this need? And really from our perspective is driven by a couple of things, a couple of mega trends. Clearly one of them is the drive for resources and the new resource discoveries across Africa. We've seen very significant finds of oil and gas and other minerals, and that really is going to drive a lot of economic activity, but also the need for a lot of infrastructure. We see demographic shifts across the world, and certainly within Africa, a young population, many coming into the job market, and that's going to also drive the need for infrastructure around transport, logistics, education, healthcare, and certainly the urban environment. Economic shifts, I think it's clear the shifts from the West, trade to perhaps more of a a stronger focus with the East, China being a major driver behind that. And then I think obviously there's the massive backlogs in infrastructure that we need to catch up on to ensure that this economic growth really does happen. And then lastly, I think we're seeing generally across African countries a renewed vigor, a renewed commitment. The Arab Spring is now quite far behind us, but I think the memory still lingers that in fact we have to provide upliftment, economic opportunities and more sustainable social and political environments, and infrastructure has a very significant role to play in the well-being of citizens.